another uh, another module here for the PHRC Fair Housing and Power Hour. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Adrian Garcia, and I'm the Director of Fair Housing and Commercial Property Division for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. And we use these primarily as a kind of a primer, right? These are 1 hour snapshots at fair housing regulations and the interplay with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. And it's designed to provide a very basic information, very basic framework. Please mute yourselves once you come into the room. Thank you so much. But we provide this as a primer to get the interest level, to find out where people are in terms of their knowledge, and then further their knowledge by providing more detailed introduction. And so many times this is attended by community members that are just trying to get some very basic information, those that are in the front line working with people that may not know what their rights are and may not know where to get the information. And so those social service entities play a vital role in bridging that knowledge gap. And of course, when the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission hires people, well, this is a way to get back to basics, right? To just get the very basic information without all the fluff and all the intricacy. You just want to know exactly what the lawmates say or what the concepts are, and then ask further questions. So we welcome all of you who have attended. And before I get too further ahead, I do want to recognize, acknowledge, and thank the folks from Deaf Hearing Interface. Cassandra is an interpreter, and we have Cassandra as well, is a captioner, and we also have Julie, who is interpreting today. So thank you so much for providing that service. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. So here's our training goals for today. We want to provide an overview of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. We want to identify fair housing laws, protected classes. And even though I say fair housing laws, it's the interface of fair housing laws with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act as well, substantially equivalent. We're going to discuss acts of housing discrimination. We're also going to discuss housing discrimination issues that face individuals from other countries, right? From other countries. And we're going to provide information about filing a fair housing complaint in the most brief manner possible. And also we're going to do the most important part, which is to answer your fair housing questions, because what is this going to be worth if you don't get your questions answered? If you have a question and you want to put it in the chat, do so, and I'll make sure, and Brittany's going to make sure that I don't forget. I also want to thank and recognize Brittany Mellinger, who is our Fair Housing Outreach Coordinator, and she is actually running the tech behind the scenes, and she's also going to be looking at the chat. So if you have any questions, she'll make sure I don't miss those, okay? Let's move on here. So who is the PHRC for those that may not know, right? We have a two-part mission. We are the leading enforcement, civil rights enforcement entity in the Commonwealth. And we have a two-part mission. And so the first part is to enforce the PA non-discrimination laws, right? The Pennsylvania Human Relations Act is one of those laws, as well as the Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act. The second part of our goal is to promote equal opportunity for all in PA. And there are various ways that we do this throughout the Commonwealth. Right? We have advisory councils throughout the Commonwealth, not in every county. We also have the Social Justice Ambassador Program. It's a new program that we have, and so we're recruiting social ambassadors. If you're living in a county and you're interested in that and getting more information, we'll provide some resources at the end of this presentation for you to do that, to get some more information. This is a map that depicts pretty much our jurisdiction, which is the entire Commonwealth. We have 3 regional offices. We have in the lighter shade of blue in the southeast quadrant of the state, we have the Philadelphia regional office, and it's led expertly by our director, Lindsay. And then we have the center baby blue area, which is our Harrisburg regional office, led expertly by Director Roth. And of course, we are in the dark blue, the Pittsburgh regional offices, led by a great trio of leaders there. And we are hiring for a regional director in that area. So if you know of anyone that has some experience, you know where to send them. Another way that we ensure equal opportunity for all throughout the Commonwealth is we work with a lot of different agencies, the Attorney General's office, local HRCs, fair housing initiatives programs throughout the Commonwealth. So we do a lot of collaborating and partnerships. So let's talk about non-discrimination laws in Pennsylvania, right? The PA Human Relations Act covers employment, housing, which will be the large focus of our discussion today, commercial property, public accommodation, primary and secondary education. Now, when it comes to the Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act, that's for post-secondary education. So let's talk about fair housing laws. When we're looking at fair housing laws, typically in an investigation, we're using the Fair Housing Act. We are using the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act in some cases where there's a HUD-funded property involved. And where it intersects, we are looking at the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I'll ask if you've come into the room, I welcome you. Please mute yourself so that we don't have any feedback. And then in other laws we have, obviously, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. And then you should also check your local ordinances to see what laws they have that protect.
I would leave the dogs home with Ben.
Ma'am, Donna, could I ask you to mute, please? Thank you. We'll move on. Fair housing laws has two goals, right? It has two goals. The first goal is to end housing discrimination enforcement. It's what we call the reactive portion of the law, right? Somebody files a complaint, it gets investigated, figure out the merits of it, and the rest, you know, it could be either conciliated or mediated, it could be settled out. The second is the proactive side of the law, right? It's affirmatively furthering fair housing to promote diverse, inclusive community. And this one's the one where society, American societies, kind of dragged their feet in the past until 2015, when the Obama administration actually put in a definition that put a little bit of teeth into it. And they defined it as taking meaningful actions in addition to combating discrimination. So in addition to being reactive, we also had to take action that overcome patterns of segregation and foster inclusive communities free from barriers that restrict access and to opportunity based on protected characteristics. And we're going to get into what some of those are. So as we talk about these protected characteristics, protected classes, those are the terms that are used, they're interchangeable. But what do fair housing laws cover? Well, they cover housing transactions. So the sale, rental of housing, housing-related transactions. So that includes the appraisal process, lending, you know, and in some cases, and we're in discussions, but in some cases, you know, getting your utility shut on might be a housing transaction, depending on the case and depending what's going on. We also look at, and we'll find out why I say that here in a little bit, types of housing that is covered is apartments and single family homes, mobile home parks, condominiums, public housing, nursing homes, dormitories, and more. And it says more because there are some instances where, you know, short-term rentals may be covered. There are some instances where shelters may be covered. So that's why you see the very vague and more at the end of that. And it's going to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. So when we're looking at discrimination, we're looking at two provisions of the Fair Housing Act. We're looking at both the disparate treatment, which is treatment that directly discriminates against a member of a protected class, i.e. maybe, Adrian, I'm not going to rent to you because you're Hispanic, all right? That's disparate treatment. You're saying you're not going to rent to me because I am, but you're going to rent to someone else that may not be Hispanic, right? Disparate impact deals more with a policy that impacts members of a protected class, something that looks neutral on its face. You know, some examples might be that you have a no pets policy, but you need an ESA animal, right? So the ESA, the requesting of the ESA animal, when you have a no pets policy, has a disparate impact against that individual with the disability. because were it not for the disability, they may not need that ESA in order to enjoy the dwelling. Okay? So let's talk about protected classes or protected characteristics, right? When we look at protected classes, I always like to say that the federal Fair Housing Act provides the foundation, and you can build upon that foundation. So the foundation is built and based on the fact that no one can be discriminated against in a housing transaction because of their race, their color, their national origin, familial status, religion, sex, and disability. But when you get to Pennsylvania, now we've added to that foundation. Now we've put in a subfloor, right? And on that subfloor, we've expanded, we fortified, right? That subfloor. Maybe we put two sheets of 5/8 board instead of one. And so in that second sheet of 5/8 board, we decided that we were going to cover race and color, national origin, familial status, religious creed, sex, disability, and we added age 40 and above, and we added ancestry, and we added the use, handling, or training of support animals for disability purposes. So as you get from the foundation to the subfloor, and then as you go into a more localized area, maybe a city within the Commonwealth, you will see that they add more to that. They be those walls of protection. You may have a protected class that is neither in the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, nor is it on the Fair Housing Act, right? Like one example I will give you is source of income. Source of income or source of legal income is protected in cities like Philadelphia, State College, and Erie, Pennsylvania. So they've added to that. So what I would say to you is you should always check your local municipalities to see if there are protected classes within that are not protected in the state or federal code. So we talked about familial status, and just to define that a little bit more, familial status is families with children under the age of 18 living with parents or legal custodians. Pregnant persons are included in this. People securing custody of children under the age of 18 are also part of this, and foster children are included. It is the presence of children, right? But there are some exemptions to the familial status. There are age-related exemptions to familial status protections, and that is under the housing for older persons. So you have, well, what is older persons housing? What is that? Well, properties that are 55 and older communities. And in order to be looked at as that, 80% of those units must be occupied by at least one tenant per unit that is 55 years or older, right? And they have to advertise and market as a 55 and older community, right? And as I said before, only one resident needs to be 55 or older, and they can deny residency and or access to the facilities and services to children and those under the age of 55. However, they need to be consistent in their application, and in some cases, there might be a need for a reasonable accommodation. There's that phrase again, right? Because that 55, only 55 and older might have a disparate impact against an individual that has a disability that may need an aid that is under, a live-in aid that is under the age of 55. And again, only one person needs to be 55 to begin with, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Where it could be a problem is when you get to a property where you have 62 and older communities. They have to be certified by the government as such. You must be 62 years old to live there, and no one under the age of 62 is permitted. And again, you know, you might require a live-in aid, maybe a family member to live with you, to look after you and to care for you. And in that case, you would ask for a reasonable accommodation because that person may not be 62 years of age. Now, you might ask yourself, well, if only 80% of those units need to be 55 or older, what happens with the other 20%? In many cases, those other units are used for individuals with disabilities that in many cases are under the age of 55. Okay? So it's not like they use them for market rate. That rarely happens. Let's talk about sex as a protected class under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. While the LGBTQ is not considered to be a protected class under the PHRA, the PHRC did recently finalize regulations that establish that the term sex may refer to pregnancy status, childbirth status, breastfeeding status, sex assigned at birth, gender identity or expression, affectional or sexual orientation, differences in sex development, and those regulations are utilized by the Commission to accept complaints and evaluate complaints, conducting investigations, and adjudicating those cases. All right. And at this time, I'm just going to ask if anybody's got any questions. I see some things in the chat. Any questions in there? I'm having trouble reading those questions. My eyesight is very bad.
There are no questions at this point.
Thank you. I need an accommodation. Here we go. We'll move on to the next one here. So disability. Get rid of this thing that's blocking me. All right. So defining disability is defined as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of a person's major life activities. Sounds very nice, but what's a life activity? Some examples are there in the blue square. These are just some examples. It's not an exhaustive list. So caring for oneself, that's an important one. Walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, working, the list goes on, concentrating. You know, these are all just some examples of caring for oneself or major life activities. And there are more. So how does that apply to the definition? Well, the Fair Housing Act protects those individuals who have a disability, have a history of having a disability, or who are perceived as having a disability. In some circles, they say are regarded as having a disability. Right? So it's pretty self-explanatory when you look at the first one, right? Person that has a disability. The second one, the person that has a history of a disability. Well, how do you have a history of a disability? Well, you're seeing a doctor, you have medications that you take, that's documented history of having a disability. You may receive a note from a doctor asking for a reasonable accommodation. That's documented history of having a disability. It gets a little tougher when you get into those that are perceived as having a disability. And I often get questions, well, give me an example. Well, one example, and I've had this in my previous career, where I had someone come in and wanted to file a complaint because he believed that the leasing agent believed that he was not altogether there. And, you know, he had caught the leasing agent basically telling another tenant that the person in unit B is, you know, and then she motioned to her ears. And so he believed that he was treated adversely because of that opinion from that person. So they're regarding me as having a disability, and that's why they don't pay attention to my maintenance request. That's why they don't pay attention to when I ask for certain accommodations. So there's a bit of an example of being perceived as having a disability, not actually having one. So let's talk about national origin. National origin refers to a person's country of origin. So a person who immigrated to the United States from the Ukraine or from any other country, for example, right? Ancestry refers to the country of a person's ancestors, right? Where my ancestors came from, Spain, or Africa, right? Or even the Caribbean, because the ancestry is mixed in the Puerto Rican experience. But an example of that would be a person with Spanish heritage who was born in the United States. And you can be discriminated for that. Somebody may just say, listen, I don't know if he's from Mexico or from Cuba, he's Spanish, that's all it takes for me, I don't want those people here. I've seen those cases, okay? And you might say, well, national origin, ancestry, aren't they really closely related? On the one hand, they could be, right? But if you're like me and you come from Puerto Rico, well, Puerto Rico is not a nation into itself. It is part of the United States. And so in that case, it's an ancestry claim, not a national origin claim. Let's talk about some discriminatory actions. Because people often ask, well, you know, when you say discrimination, especially those that do talk to me and say, well, wait a minute, people aren't being discriminated against, are they? I mean, didn't we deal with that a long time ago? And sometimes you got to say, well, you know, if somebody says discriminatory statements, that's being discriminated against. If somebody makes a discriminatory inquiry, right? Like call up for a unit and they ask you, well, how many kids do you have? Well, I mean, you've not even applied pen to paper on an application and you're already being asked how many kids you have. And so you have to wonder, what bearing does this question have on whether or not I get the unit? Right? So discriminatory inquiries, another discriminatory action. Steering, right? You might be looking at a unit that you like, it's got a nice view, but the leasing agent might decide, you know, I know you like this apartment, but you have little kids. I'm afraid they'll fall off the balcony. I'm going to put you downstairs in the first floor. Fair housing is about choice. Remember, opportunity and access to housing based on choice. Refusal to sell, lease, or finance housing. And that's just somebody saying, nope, not going to rent to you, not going to lease to you, not going to lend to you. Unfair appraisals. I've seen that in the news quite often, where people have had to take down anything that has to do with their heritage, their color, their race, just so that they can get the fair appraisal. They're not asking for more than they deserve. They want a fair accounting of the value of their home. And people find themselves in that position because there have been some unfair appraisals out there. Predatory lending, right? That's lending that is designed to target a particular class of people, protected class, maybe elderly, right? In Pennsylvania, maybe some individuals that are Hispanic, so Spanish language only to this zip code, huge interests, right? Discriminating in housing terms and conditions, right? So somebody's going to come up and just treat you differently in the terms and condition of your housing, right? It could start from the very onset where you go and you might look at a unit and there are other people. Anybody that's looked at apartment units or housing units knows that sometimes when you show up to see the place, it's an open house, there are other people there. And so they're asking questions like, what's it going to take? What do I need to do? And somebody else give information like fill this application, pay the application fee. And if everything goes well, we'll get you in. Somebody else may come in and say, you know, ask the same question. They'll say, well, here's a $35 application fee per person. Also, you need to fill that out. And then we'll need a first and last month's deposit as well as a first month's rent. See how that changes the terms and conditions. And that's a very simplified way of looking, but these are the things that do occur. Not that they want to collect that money, but they do want to dissuade certain people from applying. And so they'll use that. Unequal provision of services and facilities. Talked a little bit about that with the example I gave about perceived disability, whereas they don't give you the equal services or access to the facilities. Sexual harassment is another form of discrimination, and refusal to provide a reasonable accommodation and modification. And you've heard me talk a little bit about that already. Let's talk about national origins. We're going to dig into that, what that looks like, right? And so it's the denial or different treatment because of the physical, cultural, linguistic characteristics of another country. Do want to shout out to Realm and Kofax because they provided some of the content in here, and it wouldn't be fair to use it without giving them credit. I love the way they wrote it, and that's why I used it. But denial based on name. There have been complaints in my past where people said, no, I just, you know, I couldn't pronounce their name. And I figure if I can't pronounce their name, I'm not going to rent to them. You know, so that has happened. Different terms and conditions and citizenship requirements. We have that now. There's an issue of disparate impact that occurs as well with individuals that are migrating to this country that may not have a social security number. So while on its face, it's neutral, everybody goes to the website, they pull up the application, In order to enter, you must enter your social security number. And because you don't have a social security number, you are denied access to the application process. So that neutral policy of this is the way we do it has a disparate impact against an individual from another nation. Okay. And that would be a citizenship requirement. It's kind of coded, but that's what that is. Unequal services provided to individuals just because I can't understand what they're saying. I can't understand what you're saying. Yeah, forget about it. I can't even give you an application. You probably can't read it. These kinds of things happen. Targeting for predatory loans based on language. I mentioned that earlier. Harassment and intimidation happens more often than anybody would like to admit. It happens because of a protected class. So some code word and phrases that are heard, go back to where you came from. I personally have heard that one, actually. Large families and or overcrowding is another one. No, I don't rent to those people because they have a lot of people living in the area, and this is overcrowding. Using single family homes as multifamily dwellings, failure to maintain the property. So, you have individuals that have larger families, and in some culture, that large family, or it's not large at all, it's just the extended family. It might be uncles and grandparents. I grew up in Puerto Rico, and in Puerto Rico, you live with your family until you get married and you leave. But at the same time, you might build a shack in the back, and that's where you live with your new family. You might have your grandparents living on that property as well. And so many times what will happen in the United States is someone will rent a house, maybe it has a garage in the back, and they'll make that garage into a room, and they have extended family living there. And so that is something that gets around, and landlords talk to each other. They share their war stories. And in sharing those war stories, they develop an animosity because they're all sharing the same war story. They develop an animosity in many cases, not all of them, but those that are just kind of uneducated as to what the laws are. They don't know that they may be violating the law. Letting children roam the streets. This is another phrase that is used. Oh, I can't rent to them. Then you have all these kids running all over the place and so on and so forth. Again, if you're coming from South America, Central America, you're coming from the Caribbean, those are warm climates. Many times we spend a lot of time outdoors, playing outdoors. It's just normal behavior. There's a lack of technology and infrastructure for technology in some of those areas. And we spend a lot of time outdoors. But that doesn't mean that we let our children roam free. They just spend time outdoors. Documentation, again, talked a little bit about this. Housing providers should not have requirements that tenants have social security numbers or ITIN numbers or a birth certificate or a passport. These things that point directly to the status of the person, citizenship status. Obviously, alternatives. I mentioned earlier that you have this website where everybody goes and they open up the application and they don't have a social security number. I think that if there's a number, a visa number, a pending visa number, there should be a dropdown that allows for those alternatives. No one should be turned away from the application to housing because they don't have a social security number, and I think options need to be provided. They should examine alternative ways, and that's what I'm talking about, to qualify screen tenants for housing and to avoid disparate impact. And some refugee resettlement organizations do this. They actively take part in offering alternatives because they have to deal with a population that is coming in and may not have those documentations, but they're certainly good to be here. It's just looking for those alternatives. Even tougher still is looking for those landlords that are willing to work with those organizations. Language, this is a big one. Housing providers that receive funding from U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development are required to provide translation services for vital documents, interpret meetings when there are larger populations of non-English speakers, and prepare a language assistance plan. So the the fact is that if they're receiving funds, when they are recertifying, they should be able to provide, especially if they're receiving those HUD funds, they should be able to provide the documentation that is being reviewed in English and Spanish. They may sign the English ones, right? But they should be able to provide that, and they should be able to have some time to review that. Because one of the realities is access to education in some countries is limited. And so while somebody may speak the language, doesn't necessarily mean they read the language or have a comprehension of technical terms. And so they may need to speak to someone, have someone that is more well-versed in understanding the language or just reads it to be able to have it explained to them. It's sometimes not enough to provide the translated documentation. It may take an extra step. And so people that are receiving federal funding should be aware that this extra step is absolutely necessary in guaranteeing that that person has the same access as anybody else would. Now, as a best practice, I think all landlords should provide translated documents and translation for important meetings when feasible. This just makes it better for the landlord because the landlord can ensure that they understood everything that they talked about, and they're going to sign and attest to that fact. So not providing this, it's kind of a slippery slope. Partnership with community organizations could reduce the cost of this. So you could have, if you're a landlord and you're in this meeting, one of the things I always say is that a stable tenant means stable income for you. And how do you stabilize a tenant? Well, you make yourself the best landlord you can be by making sure that you have all the information at your disposal that will increase better communication with your tenants, that will stabilize their tenants if they find themselves in a tough situation. I'm not saying that you become a social worker, but if you're connected in the community with organizations that could help someone that's in difficulty, then it might keep them housed and keeps your rent coming to you. It's just good business. Neighbor-to-neighbor harassment. Talk a little bit about this. It shall be unlawful to coerce, intimidate, threaten, or interfere with any person in the exercise or enjoyment of or on account of having exercised and enjoyment or on account of having aided and or encouraged any other person in the exercise or enjoyment of any right granted or protected by Section 36. And you see all the 36s there, all under the Fair Housing Act. Okay, now, that's the federal code. And if you were to file a complaint with HUD, the one thing they would ask is this a First Amendment issue, is what they would ask, because they do stay away from those First Amendment issues. However, there is a protection under that. And again, it depends on what is being said. And sometimes it's not about getting all the way through the complaint. Sometimes you can shake someone up with a complaint to the point where they realize or are made to realize that something has to be done or action could be taken against them. And so you may find that a conciliation might work or just a settlement might work to bring that point home. So some examples of neighbor-to-neighbor harassment: verbal comments and or slurs, threats to personal safety, threats to report household to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Yeah, that happens a lot. Defacing property also happens a lot. And it happens in increments, right? It starts with verbal comments and or slurs. Then sooner or later, it kind of moves up to threats of personal violence. The next thing you know, somebody's defacing your property. Then it escalates even more. This is why this is very important to pay attention to, because it all starts with one slur, but it can lead to bodily harm. It could lead to assault. Let's talk a little bit about the complaint process. And normally we would have this very interesting graphic that takes you through all the two things, very hard to read because the letter is very small. And we wanted to make sure, again, in keeping with the spirit of the Fair Housing and Power Hour, to give you the prime information, just the information that will get you to ask more questions and maybe in a more in-depth training. But PHRC does not ask about immigration status when complaints are filed. And PHRC will not report anyone filing a complaint to the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Very important. PHRC does not provide telephonic interpretation when assistance is needed. I'm sorry, does provide telephonic interpretation when the assistance is needed in languages other than English. If you believe that you've experienced housing discrimination, your first step is to connect with the PHRC intake team. You'll be asked to fill out a housing questionnaire, to provide your contact information, what you experienced, and who you're filing against. So you have to have some basic information, who the person is, where they live, what they did, right? So you'll be asked that. The intake team will assess your information and see if this is a situation that PHRC can investigate under state law. If the complaint is jurisdictional, it basically means that if it's covered under our law and it's within the 180 days, because we didn't mention that earlier, but you have 180 days with which to file a complaint with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. So that's 180 days from the last act of harm, right? So maybe you were evicted, you were given an eviction notice, or you were refused a reasonable accommodation. So the date of that harm starts the clock ticking. If the complaint is jurisdictional and timely, the intake team will help you finalize your complaint. Then the person who was filed against will be notified, right? So that's what we call serving the complaint. But we got rid of all the technical jargon because, wanted to make sure that we were as clear as possible. Then you'll be assisted or asked to provide information to a neutral investigator. And that's something that everyone should know. We are neutral. We're not on one side. We're not on the side of the complainant, not on the side of the respondent. We are neutral, and we investigate the facts of the case. They'll be responsible for investigating to see if there was a violation of the PHRA. This investigation will ask for documents. It may interview witnesses. It may hold a fact finding, or it may seek other ways of obtaining evidence. The investigator will also explore if it's possible to settle the case before a finding. Now, the investigator explores this, but they do this also in conjunction with you. They will offer you the opportunity to conciliate if that's what you want to do as a complainant. It's not that it's forced upon you. If the case proceeds to a finding, there are two possible outcomes, right? So you either have a probable cause of discrimination, means that because of all the evidence you were able to provide and the witness statements that we received and the evidence we collected, it looks like there might be more likely than not a chance that you were discriminated against. That's why we call it probable cause. It's more likely than not. The other way it could go is it could become no probable cause, meaning there just wasn't enough evidence to prove that more likely than not discrimination occurred. If probable cause is found, the case may be conciliated, which basically means it'll be settled, or it could be settled, assuming the parties agreed. Or it might advance to a public hearing, or it might be filed in court. At this point, the goal is to seek the remedy for the discrimination that occurred. Now, one thing that people ask is, how long does this take? The amount of time that it takes to investigate a case varies based on the evidence, the speediness of responses from the different parties, witnesses, respondents, and everyone else, and other factors. So while I'd like to tell you, oh, we can get this done in a month, we can get this done in 6 months, I can't lie. It really depends on a case-by-case basis, the ebb and flow of the evidence and everything else. But we try and get this done as quickly as possible. So potential housing case remedies, in other words, by remedies, we mean, well, what can I get out of it, right? That's really what people want to know. Why am I filing this and what do I get out of it? If you were denied a property for rent or sale, then that might be a remedy. You might be able to get into a unit that you were asking for. If you were being evicted, then the eviction might be stopped. If you were seeking a reasonable accommodation, like you needed an ESA animal or you needed some other type of accommodation, then that would be awarded. That would be a remedy, right? Modification that you might have asked for. You might have asked for some handrails in the tub wall area. and you were denied, but now because you were able to settle this case or you were able to go through this complaint process, now it's going to be awarded to you. There might be some money for humiliation and embarrassment. Hard to calculate, but that's why we ask all the questions we ask. You know, and you might get some questions that feel almost personal, like, you know, how has this affected your personal life and your life with your neighbors and your life with people at work? You know, how's this affected your health and so on? We ask those questions because we want to make sure that as we go through this, the remedy is appropriate to the experience that you felt and what you were made to feel. So it needs to be appropriate. And so, you know, the investigators, they're good at guiding you through that discussion. There might be changes to the housing agreements. Maybe there was something in the agreement that was discriminatory and therefore, you know, as part of the remedy, it needs to be changed. There might be some policies like a no pets policy that might include breed restrictions. And so that might change in maybe them putting an amendment that says, you know, in the event that someone needs an emotional support animal, there may not be any breed restrictions. So that might be a policy change. Posting of fair housing notices. That's what we call part of the public relief. Public relief, because in a conciliation, the PHRC is party to that. In other words, we're an active party, so we've got to get something for the taxpayer, right? Because we're taxpayer funded. So want to make sure that public relief is in there. And so posting fair housing notices and distributing those types of notices to future tenants, to current tenants, part of that public relief, as is training for the respondent, right? When we're party to that, it's one of the things that we're going to ask for, and many times one of the things we don't negotiate on. Reimbursement and or forgiveness of fees. So if you paid a pet deposit, I'll use the ESA example because it's the simplest one, but if you paid a pet deposit and you've been paying $50 pet rent for the last 6 months, all that money should be returned to you as part of the remedy. There also might be some civil penalties, right, that are assessed. Again, doing something for the public relief end of it. And then there might be some out-of-pocket expenses like lawyer fees that the person that was being filed against may have to pay. So those are some of the remedies. There may be others, but those are the basic remedies. Some of the recent housing awards, you see 1.5 million housing provider failed to provide accessible units and ignored requests for reasonable accommodations for tenants with disabilities. There was a $100,000 maintenance worker sexually harassed a female tenant. So these are settlements that occurred or conciliations. There was a $90,000 award for housing provider that revoked lease and failed to address neighbor harassment based on race. And then there was one for $77,000. Housing provider made discriminatory statements and refused to rent to a household based on familial status. So as you can see, you know, we look at it on the grid and, you know, there's nothing flashy there, but then you start looking at some of the results. And these are just some that are recent. There are others that have occurred that have been larger amounts in the past. So we talked a little bit earlier about some of the resources that we have, right? The PHRC Fair Housing Resources. We have the Fair Housing Resources Guide. And we also obviously have these trainings that we put together. You see that flyer there. We also have a PHRC Speaks Fair Housing in the 21st Century. We're going into season 5 now, which starts in November. And we have flyers and a bunch of information. So you can always give us a call at the line there at the Fair Housing line. We usually try to customize our fair housing training and consultations according to the audience experience. I want to make sure that this information becomes relatable. How does it apply in your day-to-day? And so we ask questions before we go into most of our trainings, and we try and concentrate on a particular protected class or issue that they are facing. And as you can see, we have all the other resources that we've put there for you. We have also this QR code, fancy. If you haven't ever taken a survey, you know, this is the way I can prove to my boss that I actually did the work. So if you wouldn't mind taking a snapshot of that and taking a brief survey, it also helps us kind of tailor make our trainings. It keeps us with the pulse of what people that attend these trainings think, what information they'd like to see, what type of trainings they'd like to see. And we read all of these, good, bad, and ugly. We read them all, and we try and adjust as we go, because it's important to make these trainings intuitive to the experience of the people that are getting this information. You know, we ask things like, is it just too much information? Is it about the right amount of information? Was he too wonky in his speaking? Was he using a lot of legal terms that he doesn't know the meaning to? You know, so all of these things we ask just so that we can make a better training experience for those that take this training. We also have our phone number there, so you can jot that down as well. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions, because I know I've gone through a lot of information, and we are about to finish up. But any questions?
We've received two general fair housing questions in the chat. The first one is regarding assistance animals. If a tenant needs a dog, which an insurance company typically does not insure, what is the landlord's responsibility? Are they able to pass that cost on to the tenant directly?
Okay, so let's keep this generic, but the idea is that if you need an ESA and they're using the insurance as an excuse, what you can tell them is, you know, the law protects me under any housing transaction. And so moving here and requesting a reasonable accommodation would be a housing transaction. You know, that person, that landlord has to look for ways not to punish the person just because they ask for a reasonable accommodation. The insurance company, if in fact that is true, I'm not going to say it's not, but in many cases it isn't, because many insurance companies just ask two basic questions. Has this animal ever bitten anyone? Has this animal been trained for security purposes? And if the answer to those questions is yes, then the premium may go up. And I can tell that he might have had a discussion, and so they told him that his premium would go up. And so that's why they're asking whether or not they could pass it on to the tenant. And so that would be punitive. You have to look for other alternatives, but you cannot deny the reasonable accommodation based on what the insurance company says. I hope that answers that question.
All right, and the second question is if it's acceptable for a landlord to perform a credit check.
Is it acceptable for a landlord to perform a credit check as part of the process of renting the apartment, say during the application process? Is that what's being asked?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, sure. There's nothing that I know of, and I know there are attorneys here, so I don't want to be an attorney, but I've not seen anything that says that it's illegal for a landlord to run a credit check. If they're doing it consistently with everyone, right? During the application process, you have to be consistent. Everyone gets the same treatment in terms of evaluation when it comes for housing. You can't do it for one segment of the population and not for others. Any other questions? Anybody want to come off mute and ask any questions? And I can't see the time, so hold on. We got a little bit of time. All righty.
This isn't a question, it's just a comment that similarly to threats to report individuals to ICE, this individual has also witnessed individuals threatened with being reported to children and youth, which would be familial status. Right.
That's familial status, it's coercion, it's covered. And we would have to look at it. And again, you know, I always say this, even though it's not very popular. Just because somebody files a complaint doesn't necessarily mean that it's a viable complaint. However, the person has a right under the law to file that complaint. And so whoever's having a complaint filed against them shouldn't right away take it personally and should not look to retaliate. I always like to put that disclaimer out there. It's no different than you going and fighting for your rights in the court of law. And so someone is just, you know, they're taking advantage and saying, I believe I have some rights. I'm going to exercise my right in filing a complaint. Whether or not that complaint is viable is decided through and after investigation. Let's see. Somebody says, I have been harassed and discriminated against for more than 8 years now by my HOA. Can you guide me on how I can address this? What I will say is this: it really depends on the type of harassment and why you feel you're being harassed, and if you feel that it has to do with a protected class. And if you do feel that, I would invite you to give us a call, speak to an intake officer, an intake specialist, and let's see whether or not it's something that you want to file. And yeah, I try not to get into the details of any particular case, because I think it's better to do it through the process. I hope that that's not rubbing you the wrong way, but I just want to be as helpful as possible to you, not spill the candy in the lobby, if you know what I mean. Any other questions for the good of the order? All right. Well, if there are no other questions, once again, I want to thank you for being part of the PHRC Fair Housing Empowerment Hour. We look for us to have more of these as we move forward. Again, we just want to make sure that we provide this information so that people understand that there are rights out there. We didn't want to put a bunch of technical jargon at you. We just want to prime the pump. And if you want more information, you have various ways to reach us. You have my email there. You have Brittany's email. You have our fair housing line that's also there. Thank you so much for your attention. Thanks again to Deaf Hearing Interface for their collaboration and providing the interpretation. And thank you, Brittany, for running the technical on the other end. Until next time, we'll see you. Have a great afternoon.